Some of you might know I did a teaching session with my friend Jay Michelson a few weeks back for the Secular Dharma lecture and dialogue series, and him and I went back and forth about what we were going to talk about. And one of the things that we came up with that we chose not to use, which I'm going to talk about today because I know all of you so well, because it's not a very necessarily bright or happy topic, which was something that we would call dark dharma, which is kind of is there a dark side to all of this? And do we, as practitioners, tend to kind of ignore that or want that to not be true in some way? And I think that we do. So I'm going to kind of try to circle around this idea in a way. Because, there's definitely darkness in the world right now. There really has been since the dawn of time. So in many ways, there's nothing new. But there's a quote I want to read that gets quoted many, many times by Buddhist teachers from time immemorial. It comes from a teaching called the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is one of the oldest discourses in the Pali Canon. It's really quite good if you're interested in kind of checking out the Pali text. The Dhammapada is a good place to start. It's quite readable. And this is the opening stanza. It's called "Mind is the forerunner of all things." And the Buddha says, mind is the forerunner of all things. All things are preceded by mind, led by mind, created by mind, and therefore mind made. If one thinks, speaks, or acts with an unskillful mind, suffering will follow. If one speaks, thinks, or acts with a skillful mind, happiness will follow. So we kind of all know this. We hear this. We go, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I don't think we necessarily really can appreciate the implications of what's being said here. And also, if we take a look at the ancient Indian worldview, which is very different than the world that we live in right now, the perspective that they're looking for in ancient India, and certainly that the Buddha is copying to, is this idea that the mind is the forerunner, what precedes everything. And it says mind is the forerunner of all things. All things means all things. Is that there's a way in which we can take a little bit more responsibility or a little bit more accountability for what goes on in our mind. And the idea is the world, that which is really out there, actually arises in these five aggregates, and we actually create the world in our mind. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a world out there. I believe that, Collins is in San Francisco and Christine is in Portland and Randy's in Tulsa. Like, I believe you guys are really out there in the world. But the problem, what happens to us is we become second world focused. So it's a theory that I've kind of coined lately around the two world theory, which is that there is the world of direct experience. There's the world, I'm in my office right now talking to you on this screen. This is my primary world. My kids are upstairs, Shane's out of town, dogs laying on the floor. There's that world, the phenomenological world of present time awareness, which I can verify through my five sense experiences. And then there's a secondary world, which I'm not denying, you folks out there doing what you're doing, the social political landscape, the world, that which is really out there. Both of those worlds are true. I'm not going to deny that. But I think one of the things that we have a hard time doing is making sure that we take care of world one. Really, really, and this is really, I think, what the whole Buddhist meditation system is about, is the world, the primary world that I live in is the primary world of my own four foundations: my body, my feelings, my mental states, my ideation, my aggregates, my direct experience is the world that I fully, truly embody. And I can verify, I can work on that world, I can cultivate that world, I can let go of certain things. I have a lot actually of agency over the direct world that Dave Smith lives in. This other secondary world, not a lot to do there, unfortunately. I can call my congressman or write a letter or make a little nasty comment on someone's Facebook post and make another shitty little comment on a YouTube thing and feel like I'm doing my part. But I think that that's a fool's errand for most of us at this point. And so if we really take this seriously, I think there's actually a positive message here. And one of the things I think that, as you know, I'm not a huge fan of later schools of Buddhism. And I think that there's a tendency for humans. I don't have this tendency. I'm a little bit grateful, but although it backfires sometimes, there's a tendency, I think, to want to believe that human beings are inherently good. In Tibetan Buddhism, Jack Kornfield talks about it, this idea that there's this loving, abiding awareness out there that we could all tap into. I don't think so. I don't think that uh, things are inherently good or inherently bad. I don't think there's an inherent. I think it all originates dependent upon causes and conditions, which is really, most people would argue, the Buddhist's greatest contribution to human thought is his teaching of dependent origination. And what that would say, without getting in the weeds on this one, because it's mostly mistaught and vastly misunderstood, is everything is dependently originates upon everything else. So this idea that now I have the potential as being born into a human body, having a heart, mind, and having all the stuff that comes with my equipment. I can be driven by greed, hatred, and confusion. Hatred is just as likely to be part of my makeup as kindness and generosity and compassion. So the thing that was so great about Buddhist psychology is the Buddha kind of outlines the system and says, well, it depends. Are people inherently good or are people inherently evil? Well, they're not inherently anything. It just depends. And a lot of us have been through that, especially those of us in recovery. You have a hard childhood. Your parents do a shit job. Maybe you throw some trauma, some abuse in there. Maybe you have a high ACE score. And probably if that's the case, by the time you're 15, 16, 17, you might very well be likely addicted to some type of drugs or alcohol, which was definitely my case. And so when we get hurt, when we get wounded, when life goes to town on us, it's very, very likely that we develop some kind of form of coping mechanism, some kind of destructive behavior to kind of deal with that, which is probably half of you anyway, certainly me. And then, things can go on, and then we can have this kind of awakening moment where we're like, oh, this doesn't have to be the case. I don't need to pour more poison on my pain. I can actually do something about that. Enter recovery, enter Dharma practice, enter a whole range of things. And then what do we do? Then we see that this opening statement to the Dhammapada is totally correct. That if I cultivate healthy, constructive, skillful thoughts and behaviors and actions, happiness follows, recovery follows, well being follows. And if I continue to engage in hateful, sarcastic, cynical, destructive behaviors, misery follows, right? And then we start to see, holy shit, like maybe I have a lot more agency over this whole damn thing. And then we start to live, or we would cultivate a kind of contemplative life where we start taking something like Dharma practice or meditation a lot more seriously. We're like, okay, this really is, by all appearances, an inside job. And there's also, I think, really, there's something punk rock about this that makes me quite happy at the end of the day. I like all of what I'm saying, by the way. I don't want there to be some special magical thing out there. I really like the Buddha's assessment that it's all up to me, man. What do you want to do with this life? You decide how things go, because I can tell you over the many, many years, I much more enjoy, and actually at this currently, I mostly enjoy the Dave Smith mind experience. I like it in here. Now, when I go out there, all kinds of different collisions happen, but I find that it's so radically pragmatic to learn how to cultivate this kind of inner goodness. This mindfulness, kindness, generosity, all these taxonomy of terms that the Buddha would call skillful, um, is really, really good. And I would also go so far as to say, again, back to the aspect of it that feels a little bit punk rock, is that kind of making a statement, and I try to really, cultivate this, is this position that I refuse to allow the conditions of the external world to dictate my inner sense of happiness. If things need to be a certain way out there for you to be okay, man, you are fucked. You are totally fucked. And also, I don't really, also on the other side of the coin, I refuse to allow the external conditions of the world dictate whether or not I'm happy or not. Right. And so that is kind of really putting the wall down of like, I'm not giving into that. This idea that everything I need is inside of me, and there's a lot more I can do about this. And really, I one of my good teachers, I don't talk to him that much anymore, but he's one of the teachers I really respect the most because he's so skillful. There's a teacher named Steve Armstrong. If you haven't come across Steve Armstrong yet, you should check him out. He's all over Dharma Seed. When I first moved out of California and first got to Colorado and kind of left against the stream, I reached back out to him and kind of reconnected with him. And he invited me to participate in a year-long program called Touching the Earth that he was doing. Shannon and I both did it. Um, and it was 10, it was three 10-day retreats over the course of a year, lots of things. And during that year long, Steve got realized he had a gigantic brain tumor, like the size of a baseball. Uh, and he had to get it, he had to go through this huge operation and he almost died and they cut it out and they weren't sure if he was going to be able to, come back online. And the second retreat that we taught, he came to, his partner Kamala Masters came. He couldn't even talk. So he didn't even talk during the retreat because he didn't have that faculty back. And then I saw him the next time around and he was talking and he was doing much better. And he's actually back teaching again. And we had a little bit of a chat. And he knows that Death and I have been long-standing friends. And we were talking about that. He said, yeah, he said, he goes, when you get that close to it and you really see it, he said, really, he said, my only advice to anybody at this point is to cultivate the wholesome. Just cultivate the wholesome. Just really focus on really trying to bring these things out into the world. And that was all he had to say. So I was like, oh, that's really, really great. And that really kind of ties back into this, again, this thing of the Dhammapada. And then if we get into this kind of, I'll say this will be probably, many people won't be happy to hear this, but I think it's true. Culturally, no one really wants to hear this. I am not in any way, shape, or form a fan of Elon Musk or any of his thoughts or ideas. But there is this meme that's gone around. Apparently, he made a comment saying the problem with our world right now is we have too much empathy. Empathy is sort of a problem. And everybody like freaked the fuck out, of course. I don't even see the thing. I just saw the memes everywhere. And I hate to say it, but Elon's right about that. There's a book written by Paul Bloom called Against Empathy. And empathy is one of these things that can be a really, really beautiful, very, very important thing. But by and large, for most people, it's quite destructive. Now, I say that as somebody who has gotten clinically diagnosed with compassion fatigue syndrome, which they call empathy fatigue, twice. So I've experienced two particular, very distinct experiences of having empathy fatigue. And I'll tell you what, it was no fucking picnic. And it put me in two different forms of trauma therapy. So in many ways, I'm glad I had empathy fatigue twice. But when I was doing it, it was brutal. And the Buddha talks about this very much in the early discourse around what's called anukampa, which is the real word for compassion, crying out at the crying out of others. And when we see the pain and anguish in ourselves, and we see the pain and anguish in the world, if we can't relate to that in a way without becoming overwhelmed or without needing to disconnect, where if we don't have that skill, if we become overwhelmed or disconnected from the pain or anguish of the world, self or other, we're not going to be any helpful to anybody. Now, this is what people are doing right now. People are outraged, they're overwhelmed. Can you believe this? Can you believe that? Everybody's totally overwhelmed, which helps zero people, or people are fully disconnected. Or maybe you toggle back and forth between the two. You become overwhelmed and then you disconnect. You become overwhelmed and you disconnect, right? And so really, the world does not need more suffering people. I think we could probably all agree on that. And what it does is it puts us in this position where really the most courageous act of political or social activism that you could engage in at this point is to live a really a really happy, meaningful life. That is the greatest form of protest. To be a content, happy person who's making meaning out of this mess in a way that will be very attractive to other people, first of all. And if you look at, I'll say this last, if you look at the corporate capture that's gone on, that everybody's so freaked out about, including myself, is that the last thing capitalistic corporate America wants is a population of content, happy citizens who are living meaningful, thriving lives. That is really bad for the bottom line. You know, in fact, I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to just completely, actually, the idea of it freaks me out. But I was like, I'm getting off Facebook. I'm shutting down Facebook. I'm shutting down Instagram. Just because I'm fucking addicted to this stuff as much as probably you are. It doesn't get me as bad as it gets a lot of other people, but I know so many people just around my town and people I talk to who are just completely dictated by the weapons of mass distraction, you know, weapons of mass distraction. And it's just like, you know, anything we can do to remove those hooks, I think is just crucial right now. And of course, the way to do that, we'll do that now is, you know, is mindfulness practice. And the funny thing about it is, to circle back around, is like, you know, Buddhist mind training 101 is an anti-addiction cognitive exercise. It really is. You know, what do? You sit, you're quietly, you put your attention on the sensations of your breath, you hold it there. You see the mind. What does the mind start to do? Let's be honest. We say it wanders, it gets distracted, it gets lost. Bullshit, it gets addicted. It just gets sucked in. There's compulsion, there's consequence. We try to control it, but we know we can't. We negotiate with it. It's all just this festering bullshit of addiction. So every time you notice your mind getting caught up in anything that's unskillful, be it thoughts, behaviors, or actions, and you recognize that and you pull the attention off of that and you put it somewhere else, you are literally breaking the addiction cycle in real time. You know, do that 5,000 times a day, 500 times a day, and you will bear so much fruit from that one little exercise. And I know I take it for granted all the time. But when we remove our attention, first of all, we have to have mindfulness. When we recognize that we're attending to something that has no benefit for our well being or other people's well being whatsoever, which is a lot of stuff, and we make that kind of ethical choice to say I am no longer going to encourage this in my mind. We break that addiction. We put the attention wherever else you put it. That is really, you know, that is the beginning of the Buddhist meditation system. And so it's the most encouraging thing that I'm probably saying here, I believe, is that's the best news of all of this, is it's actually really, really quite simple. And many of you have been at this for a long, long time. And so there's a way in which we can feel courageous. We can have some faith and some confidence that we are doing the best we can. And we can feel good about that. But I really find that the ball, and this is just empowering for me to say and to acknowledge, the ball's in your court. It's all up to you. It's good to have some help. It's good to have some friends. It's good to have some teachers. It's good to have some supportive allies. But at the end of the day, you're driving your mind, and you are reaping whatever consequences are happening in the emotional system are all a result of what you've been paying attention to, right? And so there's all this, all the teachings of right effort, right? This is like a lot of work. The good news is we can do it. So let's spend some time doing it. You can find a comfortable way to sit.